an ultimate global podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Dickie Currer and George Mavros from Sydney.
So welcome again to another exciting series of episodes that we are covering for the startups. We have been covering some special series of episodes with the CEOs, founders, and co-founders. I would say that this is a great continuation to that because we have got somebody who is closely associated with startups. And that's how I kind of came to know him on LinkedIn, reached out to him, invited him to my podcast, and here he is. So he calls himself as the hype man for the Australian startup ecosystem. He's also the head of partnerships at the Startup Network. And definitely he holds a strong passion towards helping business owners, small business owners, people who are just starting off something of their own. So we're going to discuss all of that today. But welcome to today's podcast, Dickie. And do you want to maybe start off with a quick intro on what are you doing currently with the Startup Network?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So, as you said, my name's Dickie Currer. I'm the head of partnerships and new markets at the Startup Network. So we are Australia's largest independent startup ecosystem. So a community for founders, entrepreneurs at every stage across every vertical. And for the last 8 years, we've been known as Startup Victoria. But I guess the new part of my job being the new markets piece is because we just changed our name 2 months ago. So we're now the Startup Network, which means we're also geography agnostic as well now. So I'm currently working on trying to take what we have in Melbourne and Victoria and take it across the country to really help drive a stronger startup ecosystem for Australia.
So what have been some of the interesting things that you've recently done at Startup Network, Dickie? So there is a lot going on with the startup ecosystem in Australia and New Zealand. We've invited some of the great founders on this particular podcast. If you know about people like Michael Batko from StartMate and other kinds of people who are trying to help other startups grow. What are some of the interesting things that you see recently happening in Australia and New Zealand in this ecosystem?
There's so much happening. It's such an exciting time to be part of this space. I think, even in spite of the, downturn in the economic climate, there's still so much activity and so much entrepreneurial spirit in Australia and New Zealand. Everyone's obviously crazy about AI right now. That's all everyone's talking about is artificial intelligence. And we've seen that from a couple of events we've hosted recently. So back in May, we had Australia's largest ever pitch night. So we host pitch nights probably once a month, hosting the first one in Sydney next week, actually. So we're going to be doing more regularly across the country. But we had 560 people in the room for that event. And normally we'd get sort of 200 people. So you can see this kind of groundswell of excitement. We also hosted Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, obviously creator of ChatGPT. We had over 2,000 people come to that event. So we were there, put a real stake in the ground in terms of putting Australia on the map in that space. So I feel like there's just so much going on right now and such an appetite for connection, people wanting to talk about startups and starting their businesses. It's so exciting.
So there are a lot of pillars that kind of form the foundation of this startup ecosystem, Dickie. So you can see that there are angel investors, there are VCs, there are people who are coming up with their own ideas. Then there are people like StartMate and other investors like Airtree and Investable and people like that. Which of these pillars do you think has got the biggest role to play, or do you see that all of them have got equal role to play in growing this ecosystem ahead?
Yeah, I think it's, I think that it takes a village to build a startup is kind of what we say at the Startup Network. And there are so many different elements of that village. For me, the real pillars that you need for a successful ecosystem there's two things, really. It's the right people. So, founders, entrepreneurs coming in, starting businesses, and the right infrastructure supporting those people. So looking at the first one, the right people, you need the right kind of environment to help keep breeding new innovators, right? So universities obviously are really important to inspire and bring in innovation and I guess get people on the start of their entrepreneurial journey. Government's really important, play an enormous role in terms of incentivizing people to start a business and creating an environment where they can do that. And the environment itself is, is hugely important in terms of creating an entrepreneurial mindset. There's got to be problems to solve. I think in Australia, we're lucky that we've got a pretty high GDP. So it lends itself to starting your own business, and having a business is, I guess, a status symbol, being a founder and a CEO. And then you need people who've done it before, right? And there's this flywheel we always talk about. So people like Canva, Atlassian, they can almost be poster children to inspire the next generation. And then the second part to that, like I say, is the infrastructure, right? So it's like you need government there who can incentivize, whether that's tax incentives or putting money behind the innovation economy. You need investors, you need capital coming in, whether that's from family offices, VCs, and then you need support services, like you say, your start mates, your accelerator programs, your community groups, like the Startup Network, and all the service providers that support. So I think there is such a complexity to having a strong ecosystem, but it really just boils down to that flywheel of, as the people have that entrepreneurial mindset and as they start businesses, the support services obviously grow as well. And those two things kind of grow in tandem.
Yep. I think that's very interesting, which I think George will also highlight later on, that how important it is for us to start building a mindset of an entrepreneur within people. I was talking to George a few days ago that, this is something which I'm really passionate about, helping others out through the projects that we have, like this Ultimate Global podcast. This is a great platform for people to just come and discuss and share problems, and then we can pass on this message to the society. But I'll pass it on to George now for any questions that he has for you.
Yeah, Dickie, the network that you've built and the organisation, is it focused in any one particular area, or if I'm a startup for anything, or is it almost anything? How would you define that?
It's absolutely anything, George. So we're really passionate about making it very inclusive, right? So, you think startups, the first thing you think of is tech, right? And so there's so much activity, so much hype for tech, and it's the future. But we had a physical products pitch night back in March, and we had a month where we dedicated all our content to physical product businesses, because we don't want to just be about tech. We want to make it inclusive. We want to help, and it's not just about startups. The term startup really is just a broad made-up term. We want it to be about small businesses too. We want to be able to support everyone. So it's completely agnostic, which it means we're a generalist organization, so we don't necessarily get into the nitty-gritty so much. But I do think it's really important to have those organizations that are broad and are agnostic of industry, because we can help connect people who are working on different things but share common problems, and there's almost strength in having that, in my opinion, as long as you have kind of those micro communities as well. A great example, we're hosting an event next week in Sydney. Today I sat through 8 pitches from startups and looked at their decks, and it was really exciting to engage. One of the best parts of my job. And we had people who were building products for babies and building products for end of life services. So we literally had the whole spectrum of the start and the end of your life, and at the same time people who were doing artwork automation, people who were doing climate solutions. So it's really broad, and to be honest, I find that super interesting, because it means I get to, I guess, be not an expert, but dive into an area one month and the next month we go into something else.
And is it your organisation providing support and all of that, or is it peer support, or or a combination? How does it come together?
It's a combination, George. Yeah. So naturally we provide platforms for the community to engage and come together. So they can start their own Slack channel, say, about a certain vertical, or kind of self-activate in terms of meeting. But then we also have programs, so we have partners that run programs which are like almost like mini pre-accelerators. Cost hardly anything. You become a member and you get them for free. And that's really about trying to break down the barriers to innovation, so people don't have to go and spend thousands of dollars on a course or, give away equity to join an accelerator program. So we've got mentors. Like I say, events are a core part. We have workshops, education, thought leadership. So it really is a combination of both.
So your job title, Dickie, is Head of Partnerships and New Markets. That seems to be a lot of work because there are two segments to that. One is partnership, and then other one is looking into the new market. So what's the most challenging part of your role as a head of partnerships at the Startup Network?
Our commercial model is, reliant quite heavily on industry partnerships. So we're a not-for-profit. We don't have any government backing. We work with government sometimes on small programs or event sponsorships, but ultimately it's, a large part of it is relying on working with world-class service providers, universities, city councils, real broad spectrum of partners that want to come in, provide tons of value to the entrepreneurial community. But obviously, for us, it's also a way for us to monetize that, to help them with brand awareness, brand equity. And obviously right now it's a challenging time. People's budgets aren't what they were 2 years ago. So I guess, managing that partner portfolio, keeping that active, keeping that churning is the hard part. The new market part is just a whole nother ball game, which is really exciting. So that's a new part of my role I've taken on over the last month, as we are looking to take the community beyond Victoria and into the rest of the country. And so something that I'm really passionate about. I think we need to have one voice when it comes to the Australian ecosystem, not be so segmented. And part of that is geography. Part of that is just how it's been built around sort of states and cities. So the new market part, I would say the partnerships part's hard enough, but the new market part is a whole nother ball game, which I'm just starting to invest my time in. But it's what I want to do, and it's where we need to do, and it's how we can help the whole country and really put Australia on the map in terms of innovation.
So you say yourself as the hype man of the Australian startup ecosystem. Who gave you that name, or was that something you coined yourself?
A bit of both. So people started calling me that randomly. I probably heard it a few times. And, when someone introduces you by email or at an event. And so I decided to take up the moniker and stick it on LinkedIn. And you know what happens when you do these things? It kind of self-actualize, and then everyone starts calling you it all of a sudden. So, and now I get people coming up to me saying, I'm the cheer girl, or I can be the cheer girl to your hype man and things like that, which is great. I mean, what it's really about, it's a bit of fun, which I think we're allowed to have in every part of life, but especially in the startup world. It should be fun starting a business. But it's really about advocacy. It's like that's kind of what I mean when I say that. It's like I'm an advocate, I'm a champion for founders and for entrepreneurs and for the Australian economy at large, innovation economy. But yeah, I enjoy the title.
Any follow-ups on that, George?
Well, not specifically on that, but sort of to that. So we've talked about you're agnostic as far as the startup goes. What about the size or the investment, or like if we're not putting $200,000 in, are we not interested? Is it today I was talking to a couple of guys that have got $250,000 and they want to invest in a specialized importing operation. And then I was talking to a husband and wife that he's sick and tired of working for other people, and he wants to start up his own painting business. They're both startups. Where do those sorts of things sit within your structure?
Yeah, again, agnostic. Yeah, I would say, agnostic of stage is kind of how I describe it. So we have people in the community that don't have a business, right? They want to support and they want to come in and, I always make the joke that maybe they sit at home and watch Shark Tank and they enjoy, seeing the entrepreneurial society, the entrepreneurial society, and people that are in that. So I think sometimes we have people who just come just to network and be a part of it, right through to companies that have raised $10 million, and are making sort of 100 million ARR. So it's super broad. And again, I think there's so much power in having that broadness to the community. That networker who watches Shark Tank could work for a Big Four, and potentially be the next customer for one of the startups that's at the event. And then, like we said at the start, in terms of that flywheel of the ecosystem, that $100 million ARR business, valuation business, they could be the next investors into the early stage startups, or they can kind of talk about their journey and I guess provide that mentorship and that support. So again, it's super broad in the community, and I think there's so much power in that.
Fair enough. If the power was about to go out here and there was 3 things that you desperately wanted to get out to people that are watching our podcast, what would those 3 things be?
That's a really tough question, George.
You're up to it.
Yeah, I think so. Firstly, I guess any advice I give to entrepreneurs or anyone really in life is enjoy it. Life's about the journey, not the destination, right? So it's like and I think that's the case with everything in life. But it's so hard building a business. It really is, and you can see that. That's why the founders come into our network, because they want that community, they want that support, right? So I'd just say, if you can, try to lean into it and remember to have fun, enjoy it. You chose to do it because you wanted to make change. I think the second thing would be to you never feel ready, right? So I think and I'm definitely someone that needs this advice to give to myself. I've just launched a newsletter called Global Startup Perspectives, which is about basically shining the spotlight on emerging markets and what's happening in different startup ecosystems. And I probably sat on the first article for about 6 months, had it written, and I was just overthinking, in terms of, I'll do this first, and then I'll craft it like this, and then I'll do this. And I was like, eventually, one day I just went, I need to get it out. I need to get it out into the universe and just take the first step. I think that's always the hardest. And so I think to understand that you're never going to feel ready, and you're always going to be embarrassed by your first MVP or your first business or the first thing you do. Just get it out there. I'm sure you guys probably feel the same about the podcast. That very first episode that you did. And the third thing would just be find community around you. That's for me is just, I've realized the older I get and the more conscious I become of what a community actually is. It's so important in life. It doesn't have to be, I don't mean it has to be a membership community like a startup network. It could be, someone down the road, your local neighbors, your sports team, whatever it is. Find your people and invest your time in them. They're my 3 things, George.
Not too shabby a list.
Thank you.
And I think I'm strongly inclined towards the last one that you have just shared, Dickie, because I feel that community and networking kind of are 2 important things that I feel are very important. And some of the things that I've been doing in that direction in the last 1 year, other than this podcast, has been a meetup group that I've formed. So just for your reference, I run a meetup group every weekend, and we organize coastal walks in different parts of Sydney.
Awesome.
We have organized around 26 walks now, and the meetup group has now got 1,300 plus members. Wow. I think that's a great way to have informal interactions with people. But then when you're having those informal interactions, you kind of talk about some other things as well. You talk about, where are you working? What are you doing other than these walks? So I feel that's a very cheeky way and a very subtle way to put and tweak in other things as well in conversational style. Of course, you don't have to just add on those things, but I think it's a great way of doing informal networking, but also in a very subtle way, kind of add other elements to it if people are open enough to hearing to that. So I feel that's a very, very useful point. But I had another question for you with regards to the startup. So we have chatted with other startup founders as well. Definitely there are some different ingredients for startups that fail and startups that succeed. So what, according to you, has been some of the elements that you have found for the startups which have succeeded and which have not succeeded?
I think a lot of it comes down to the founder, and that's very cliche, but I think you need a founder who's really passionate, really dedicated, has really thick skin, especially if they're raising capital. It's a lot of rejection to get used to, and a human-centered approach to building a business. And I say that as the broad term rather than just saying listening to what your customer wants, which is so important in building your business. So I'd say the founder is really important. You need a strong product, ultimately. A well-researched go-to-market strategy, which is something that I think can often be so undercooked, especially monetization, commercialization. It's not always people's strong points. I find early stage founders who have like a real passion for something they want to build, and then I probably think a really strong organizational culture. Because that's so often when you fall down is in that scaling period when you start to hire. So again, so many founders, they want to build a business, they don't want to manage a team, right? So they don't come into it thinking I'm doing this so I can manage a team of 100 people. So I think that's so important to get right at the early start. Early traction is something I always look for, and a little bit of luck. I think ultimately, it's timing. Timing can be a massive element whether your startup succeeds or fails. And that's something you can't control, unfortunately. But a little bit of luck sometimes is the last little sprinkle of ingredient you need.
So you said that in your profile, you have kind of doubted yourself 5,000 times. I don't know about that number for myself, or I don't think George might know for himself. But I sometimes doubt on a lot of things that I do. Take this podcast as an example. When we started this podcast, I had a lot of doubts on what am I doing, why am I doing, and then there are people around you who question you on what you are doing, why are you doing, you're not getting anything out of it, you're not getting any money, why don't you just go back to your old traditional 9 to 5, you're not getting anything out of your idea, it's damn unsuccessful. How do you kind of motivate yourself in those times as a startup founder when nothing is working your way, everything is failing, and you're just about to reach a break-even point? As a lot of founders say, you just need to wait for a break-even point, and that's the time you have to just be patient and not get demotivated.
I think it's about having like a growth mindset, right? So it's like understanding that even though it's challenging and you might not be winning in that moment, that you're still making forward momentum in life, right? So you're still like, and that kind of ties into what I said earlier about life being about the journey, not the destination. It's like just to understand that it's a process, and what you're doing is your life's work. You probably left your corporate job that paid really well to build something that you could be super proud of. So to understand that whatever you're doing, even if it's not working in that moment, and it very likely won't work the first time, it might not work the 10th time. I met a founder recently who just exited his business. I think sold it for 100 million, his shares in the business at least, and it was his 15th business, and the first 14 failed. And so if he had, if he took that failure as too seriously, or took that as how his life was going to pan out, and took it as the end solution, he'd never have got to that 15th business, right? So it's just having that kind of growth mindset, I think, is really important. And again, something I've mentioned already is community, right? In those moments, that's when you find your people and rely on them, and that's why you have them around you, and whatever that is, friends, family, other entrepreneurs, and we often find it is other entrepreneurs. It's a very lonely journey starting a business. And often you can come, and I know this from, I'm a workaholic in this business, in this industry, myself. And, I sometimes come and meet and see my friends outside of work, and they don't understand, and they wouldn't. We've all got our own kind of things happening. So founders, that's really, really hard, I think, sometimes for them to, they spend the whole week trying to raise capital from a VC, and then they go to a family dinner and have to try to explain what's going on in their life. You want people who can understand and relate to that. So I think community of entrepreneurs is so important to do that.
I think George might want to share some of his experiences as well when he started his journey, isn't it?
I was laughing to myself when he was asking you that question. One of the things I train people in strategic decision making and strategic selling. And one of my sayings is, if you have the courage to fail, you automatically earn the right to succeed. Now, it doesn't mean that you will. It doesn't mean that you will, but you automatically earn the right to succeed if you have the courage to fail. I went looking for one of the ones that I've always enjoyed from the first time I heard it, which is from Mandela, and I changed it a little bit. But I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave person, he said, man, the brave person is not the one who does not feel afraid, but it's the one who conquers that fear. And the other one that I have told people, well, there's two that I'll share. Number one, about 15 years ago, I was doing some research on some stuff. I don't think it's probably changed, but back then, the average millionaire had gone broke 2.5 times before they became a millionaire. And last but by no means least, quite often, the difference between stupid pig-headedness and unwavering commitment and courage is a result at the end of the journey.
I love all of those quotes, George. I'm going to steal some of those for sure.
My pleasure. Just acknowledge some of them are mine.
I will.
But the number of times, Dickie, that the person sitting on the lounge, the person sitting on the sideline, not even on the sideline, in the stand, can tell you that you shouldn't have done this or you shouldn't have done that as the batsman or the soccer player, whatever. They don't have any right. If you're a spectator, that's all you are.
Exactly.
And I would much rather be a failed participant than a self-centered spectator.
100% agree.
I didn't know that that's an ending statement from you.
Saurabh, you know, if you want me to, I'll keep going, because the sort of stuff that Dickie and I could speak about.
I never knew that you have just thrown the ball at my court. I didn't know that.
What a wordsmith, eh?
Yeah. All right. I'm sure that Dickie has also got some learnings from your quotes. He's going to share the first thing tomorrow morning on LinkedIn that I had a wonderful interaction with George Mavros. And these are the quotes that I learned from the podcast yesterday. But Dickie, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you spending time with us this evening. I'm sure that this episode is definitely going to add a lot of value, especially to the new founders and the startups whenever it is out.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, Saurabh, George. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure.
Thanks,
as well.
Dickie. And I also want to invite you to our special event, which is happening on the 30th of August when we celebrate the 2 years of this podcast. So if you are in and around Surrey Hills, you should join us in that evening. Even if you come for 15 minutes, George will really appreciate that for all the sayings that he has told you today.
That's a payment. Thanks, guys.
I have a funny feeling, Saurabh, that Dickie and I will be catching up in the not too distant future.
Definitely.
For the English victory and the World Cup final, for sure.
You are stirring again.
This is an Ultimate Global Podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Currer and George Mavros from Sydney.